Hey Essentials families, I thought it'd be a great idea to give you a quick illustration of a few things. This first one is the compound complex structure. Okay, so in class you should have worked through some examples, but just for my parents and students who were not able to make it to class today, and for those that might need a little reinforcement in this structure, I wanted to do a video to send out to you for this week. Okay, so the compound complex is a combination of our complex and compound sentence structure. So remember, a compound has at least one independent clause, a fanboy, and then another independent clause. They are separated by a fanboy with a comma after the first independent clause. And then our complex sentences have at least one independent clause and one dependent clause. And that dependent clause can be an adverbial clause with a www.asia.wub or an adjectival clause with a who which clause. So we're going to illustrate that on the board. Okay, so this week we're supposed to be working with SVI patterns and SVTDO patterns. So I tried to construct that for you to show you how to combine them to make a compound complex sentence. So here, our first sentence, the Falcons jumped for joy. That's our simple sentence, SVI. Falcons being our subject, jumped being our intransitive verb. For joy is a prepositional phrase that modifies jumped. Next, we have the Falcons won the game while the fans cheered loudly. So here we have a compound sentence. A compound sentence has one independent clause and one dependent clause. So my independent clause, the Falcons won the game. And then my dependent clause, while the fans cheered loudly. While is a www.asia.wub subordinating conjunction. So that starts our dependent clause. So when we combine them to make a compound complex sentence, we come up with the Falcons, who won the game, jumped for joy, and the fans cheered loudly. So here, remember, a compound complex sentence has at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. And you're going to see your fanboys and your www.asia.wub words in your sentence. So let's look at this. I color coded them so that you could see the different parts of the sentence. So my first independent clause would be the Falcons jumped for joy. That's my first one. My second independent clause would be the fans cheered loudly. And they are combined with the coordinating conjunction, the fanboy. And then last, my dependent clause would be a who which clause or an adjectival clause. I'm going to do that in another color. And that would be who won the game. So there I have my two independent clauses and then my one dependent clause, which makes my compound complex sentence structure. Now let's see how to diagram this. Diagramming it is not as tricky as you think. It's a combination of what we've learned already. A combination of diagramming our first independent clause, which is a simple sentence, and then it's a compound sentence, and then our dependent clause, which would be our who which clause. So let's do our first independent clause. The Falcons jumped for joy. Let's question confirm. Who or what jumped? Falcons. So that would be my subject noun. What is being said about Falcons? Jumped. That would be my verb. Falcons jumped what? There is no noun that follows that, so then that makes my verb intransitive. For joy, for is a prepositional phrase. For is a preposition, joy would be the object of the preposition. So let me label that. The is our adjective article. So let's go ahead and diagram that. So as I mentioned in my class, with these compound complex sentences, because there's so many clauses put together, you kind of have to pre-plan how to put them on your paper to make sure that you have enough space to diagram them correctly. So if we know that our who, which clauses connect subject to subject, make sure that you allow for that. And if we have a compound sentence and we know that the fanboy connects verb to verb, make sure you allow for that. And also with your modifiers, make sure that you leave enough space. So if you question confirm prior to diagramming, take a look and see what you have so that you can make the space available for you to diagram correctly. So let's go ahead and actually question confirm all of this very quickly. Our first independent clause has already been done. That's a SVI. Next, let's do our next independent clause. The fans cheered loudly. So who or what cheered? Fans, subject noun. What is being said about fans cheered? Verb. Fans cheered what? There is no noun, so this is another intransitive sentence. Intransitive verb, sorry. Cheered how? Loudly. So that's an adverb, another modifier. The would be our adjective article. This would be our coordinating conjunction, our fanboy. And so now we have our dependent clause. Who won the game? Who or what won? Who. So that would be our subject pronoun. What is being said about who? Won. That would be our verb. Who won what? Game. That would be our direct object. So that would make our verb transitive. The would be our adjective article, answering the question, which game? Okay, so let's diagram. So, let me get my blue. You know, our subject always goes here for our first independent clause. So we are going to first diagram the Falcons jumped for joy. So, Falcons goes here. Jumped, our verb, goes on this side. And then for joy modifies jumped. So we make our prepositional phrase here. For is our preposition, joy is the object of the preposition. So now let's do our second independent clause. Get my black. The fans cheered loudly. So fans is the subject. Cheered would be our verb. Loudly modifies cheered, so that will go here as a modifier. Oops, not cheered. Loudly. And then we are going to connect them with our fanboy here, verb to verb. So you do your little dash line and goes there. So now the only thing we have left to diagram is our dependent clause. So let's put that here at the bottom. So we have our subject that goes here, that would be who. And then we have our verb, won. And then we have our direct object goes here, game. The modifies game. That would go here on a slanted line. And so now our subjects need to be connected by a dotted line. Subject to subject. And that's how we would modify an adjectival clause in a compound complex sentence.